Hey guys, it's Lynn Pratt. Thanks so much for joining me today to paint these Air Jordan 4 Thunders. Now you can notice something a little bit different. I'm painting this on black paper. This is Legion's Stonehenge Aqua black cold press paper, and this is their newer heavyweight paper. It's actually 300-pound paper. So I'm going to do this painting on this nice, beautiful black background paper because the shoe is mostly black and we'll just put in the brighter parts. So I'm going to paint this with Holbein's traditional colors of Japan Iridori, and this is actually a gouache. So it's a watercolor because it's water soluble. You can always re-wet it just like a watercolor. However, it's opaque. That's why it's gouache instead of just regular watercolor, and it'll show up really nicely on this beautiful black paper. So let's get started. For my colors, I have my gouache on my palette. I have my white, silver gray, and black. And then I have two different yellows. My lighter one is a canola yellow, and my darker one is a Caria japonica yellow. Okay, so you don't need these exact colors. I have a white, a gray, a black, a light, and a darker yellow. Okay, so I have my colors all set on my palette, my gouache colors, my black paper, my beautiful sneaker, and I'm ready to go. For the parts of my shoe that I want to be bright, bright yellow, even though my paint is opaque, it's still watercolor gouache, so it's not 100% opaque. So for the areas that I want to be that beautiful, bright yellow, I'm actually going to paint a layer of white over the black paper and let it dry completely before I put that bright yellow on. I could just build up and up and up my layers of yellow. However, it's much easier if I just add some white in all the areas that I want to have that bright yellow in the end, and it'll just really kind of make those areas glow. So I'm using my Holbein Gold number 8, and I'm just putting a light wash of white in. You don't have to have the wash perfectly smooth or anything like that. The goal is to just cover where that bright yellow is going to be. So you'll notice I didn't go straight over the line, even though the yellow continues. So I'm just going to leave kind of a little space where that line is so that I can find it later when I'm putting my bright yellow on. So I'll just kind of go around that to make sure that I only have the white where I want the bright yellow and I'm not covering up any lines or anything. So I'll kind of just leave just a small area in between there, even though it's yellow, just so later when I'm painting, I don't have to wonder where all of those lines are, because I don't think it will show through my white paint. So I'm just going to go through and just paint all the areas that are going to be that bright yellow. While I'm waiting for my white areas, which will be yellow areas, to dry, I'm going to come in with some of my black paint. Now the paper is already pretty black, but if I put black paint over some of the areas, you'll see that it does show up. So make sure, without trying to stick my hand in my wet white paint, I'm going to come around and just put some of the black in on the areas of the shoe that are really shadowed and much darker, so that I can kind of define the edge even where I'm not putting a highlight. Went over my white a little bit there. But this is the inside of the shoe that's kind of back in the shadow. So I'll put that black on and a couple other places that it really gets quite a bit darker against the shoe. You can see how dark the paper is when that opaque black, you can barely see that against it, but just enough to give it a little bit of a difference there. And now I'm going to come in with that silver gray. And just like watercolor, the more water you add to it, the lighter it gets. So I want to lighten this gray up. I don't want it super bright. I don't want it to end up super light. And what I'm going to do is put some of this gray in over the laces. Now remember, when it dries a little bit darker. So these are really black laces, but they have a little bit of highlight on them from where the light hits them. So I'm just coming in with a little bit of that gray and kind of coming in sort of a dry brush fashion. I want to make sure it sticks out against the edge of the black paper, but not so much that it doesn't end up looking like a black shoelace. So you can see if I put it on a little bit thicker, it gets really gray. So if I just add a little bit of water to that and kind of dilute it down, it darkens. So the more water you add to it, the more of the black paper you'll see through, because the lighter the gouache will get. So you kind of just have to think in opposites when you're using the black paper. And you can lift with this gouache just like you normally can lift. So if you put a little bit too much on and you need to, you can come back and lighten it after. That's not an issue at all. And just like that, you can come back and add more to it as well, add a second layer to lighten it up. So remember, just because you're using the darker paper, everything doesn't have to be put on in just one wash. You can do it just like you layer watercolor. So I'm going to kind of skip around and put some of the highlights and some of the brighter areas in with the gray. My white parts that my yellow is going to go over are completely dry. So now I'm ready to come in and put my yellow in. So I'm using the darker of the two yellows. It's the Caria Japonica yellow, but it's kind of just the slightly more orangey that matches the color a little bit more. So I'm coming in with my size 6, and I'm just going to start on one end. I'm not going to pre-wet because I already have a layer of color on there of the white. And I'm going to go right over those edges that I had on there before, because I will be able to see them once it dries, because those areas are darker underneath, and that way I can get just a nice smoother wash over the whole thing. So I'm moving pretty quick, because again, I don't want to re-wet that bottom layer and move it around. I just want to lay this layer of gouache right over it so it keeps that bright of the white behind it. And I'll just come in kind of quick, make sure it's going on nice and even. And depending on how much water you have in your gouache, I have mine kind of, again, gouache is a little thicker than watercolor, so I have mine kind of the consistency of cream when I'm putting it on here. Let's see, I want to make sure I don't go over where that shading was. So just go right up around that. Now, remember, I'm going to do more layers over this. So I'm just going to let it be for now and let it dry and move on to those other yellow areas. Now that my color is just about dry, I can come in and start putting a few details in. So I have my white paint on my size 3 Holbein Gold round. And if I look really carefully, I can kind of see where the little guy was on here, and I can add him in with my white. I kind of lost him when I put my wash on there, but that's okay. I can kind of see where he is, and just look at the reference photo as well. It goes all the way up to about here, kind of comes down, and the front leg comes out this way a little bit, right out to the edge. His head's a little funky shape, but that's okay. Okay, so I have that in with white, and then I have another little guy that's on the back of the shoe that I can put in my white as well. And again, this is like the consistency of cream. When it dries a little bit darker. So I can put it on, and if I need to, I can come back and put another layer on as well. But I can just add that. Now I'm going to come through while I have my white and put in just a few of my highlights. So there's kind of just like a little bit of a reflection along the top of that, where some of these kind of really get some light. I can add just a little bit of white on the laces, just on a few tiny places, because remember, they're black. So we don't want to give the impression that they're actually white, but where the light is hitting them, some of them are kind of like shiny. So I can start putting in a little bit of the texture of the laces and kind of make them just kind of pop out just a little bit. And then the same with the front of the shoe. There's kind of a highlight on the edge. Get a little bit more paint. There's kind of quite a highlight right on here. Okay, so you can see I'm just kind of going through and adding, not in bright or a lot of it, but kind of just to pick up a little bit on some of those highlights. And definitely on the end of the shoelace where there's the plastic, it has some light hitting it on back and kind of the light on the front. And now that this is starting to dry, I can come back and just add a little bit more of a second layer on it and brighten that up quite a bit. Over on this part, this gets pretty light, but it kind of just fades out. So it's same like that. And I'll do a little bit lighter white, so just a little bit more water to it. And adding the highlight along that plastic piece. Just a little bit lighter, okay? So I can go around and add those, and then I can also come in and add where the laces are. So where the stitching is, it kind of has the little highlights on it. So I'll just come through with my white. And again, I'm not trying to make it look like white laces, but just to pick up some of those little highlights on them. And you can see the pencil lines pretty bright still, but I don't want you to just see the pencil line. So I'll just come through, and especially on this front, they actually get a little bit darker. So I'll add my highlight, but then I'm actually going to come through with my black and add black as well. So I have my highlight there. I'll rinse out my brush, come through, grab a little bit of my black, and because I put a white, like a lighter with the gray, the background on there, that stands out a little bit more. And I can add that black in as well. Okay, so I'm going to go through and start putting in some of those laces, some of those extra details, and kind of just work around where everything is. I'm going to come through and adjust some of the yellow now as well. So where I had that area that's a little bit darker, all I'm going to do is actually go through and just lift out a tiny bit of the yellow. And I can just blot with my paper towel to just lift it up. But I don't need to add a darker color over it. I just lift the yellow up, and then you can see the black paper that's under there. So that's all I have to do for that darker line. And then for the lighter line, I'm just going to come in with my lighter yellow, my canola yellow. And I can put some of the highlights in with my canola yellow. So where it's quite a bit lighter around the top, I'm just going to come in with that lighter yellow and put my highlight in. If your highlight is really light, you can also just put it in with white right over the yellow. Same with over on this other side, where the light is hitting that curved edge, and the same with down going across here. So there's kind of like a ridge between the two areas on the shoe here. Comes down and goes across with that lighter yellow. And then the same with around under our little air pocket here. We can put just a little bit of an edge in right on that inside. Okay, so I can go around and adjust the same where some of these areas up here get quite a bit lighter. It's lighter right there, and then it kind of skips a little and comes across. My top area is lighter, leaving my bottom area a little bit darker, and around the laces a little bit darker. So I kind of have a shadow under there, and just come around. Okay, so oh, my black isn't quite dry there. I don't want to smudge that black. For sure, once you get that black everywhere, it'll really be everywhere because it's really opaque and dark. Make sure all that's dry before I come in there. Okay, so I'm going to skip around with some of that lighter yellow, put some highlights on, and kind of just move around and do some final touches. I think at this point, I'm going to call this one done. I like how it came out. I don't want to overdo it. I really want to leave as much of that black paper as possible with this super nice black background. So thanks so much for joining me to paint this Air Jordan 4. It's called the Thunder is this colorway. I hope you guys like it. Let's paint.